The Barrett family reunion was in full swing at my Aunt Catherine's estate when I heard it again. That familiar whisper that had followed me for 20 years. The family mistake, my cousin William muttered to his wife, casting a sidelong glance at me. Can't believe she still shows up to these things. I adjusted my simple black blazer, Armani though they'd never recognize it, and touched the fountain pen in my pocket. The same pen I'd use tomorrow to sign the contracts that would change everything. Miss Morgan, my assistant's text flashed on my phone. Evergreen Enterprises board has approved the final contracts. They don't realize Morgan International owns their new savior company. I smiled, thinking about the Barrett family business, Evergreen Enterprises, and how desperately they needed this deal to survive. A deal with a mysterious company that was actually one of my many subsidiaries. A deal that would put their entire empire under my control. Morgan, my Uncle Richard's voice boomed across the lawn. Still working at that consulting firm? What do they call you there, junior analyst? If he only knew that Morgan International, the consulting firm they thought employed me as some minor functionary, was actually my global corporation. That their family mistake had built a business empire while they were busy mocking her existence. Something like that, I replied quietly, watching my cousins cluster around the newest family success story, William's promotion to vice president at Evergreen. My phone buzzed again. The latest market analysis of Evergreen Enterprises. Their stock had dropped another 15% this month. Tomorrow's contract signing was their last hope, though only the board knew how desperate things really were. Did you hear? Aunt Catherine's voice carried across the garden. William secured the Maxwell contract. Saved the company millions. I suppressed a laugh, knowing that the Maxwell contract had actually been orchestrated by one of my shell companies. Every major deal Evergreen had landed in the past year had been carefully manipulated by the very person they called a mistake. Morgan, my mother approached, her voice tight with familiar disappointment. Couldn't you have worn something more appropriate? This is a family celebration. I glanced down at my deliberately understated outfit, thinking about the closet full of designer clothes in my penthouse office. Clothes I never wore to family functions, maintaining the image they'd created of their unsuccessful relative. Sorry, Mother. This was all I could afford. She sighed dramatically. If only you'd joined the family business instead of running off to do whatever it is you do. What I did was build Morgan International into one of the largest private corporations in the world. What I did was systematically acquire every company Evergreen depended on. What I did was wait patiently for the perfect moment to show them exactly who the family mistake had become. Morgan, William called out, his voice dripping with false concern. We're discussing the new merger. But it's probably too complicated for you to understand. The merger he meant was tomorrow's contract signing, Evergreen's last-ditch attempt to save itself from bankruptcy. A contract that would put them under the control of Summit Acquisitions, which was actually a subsidiary of Morgan International. My phone lit up with another message. Final paperwork prepared. All shell companies in position. They won't know you own everything until you sign tomorrow. Tell me, William, I said carefully, how much do you know about Summit Acquisitions? He puffed up immediately. There are new partners. I personally negotiated the deal. Saved the company if I do say so myself. I thought about the negotiations, conducted entirely through my representatives while I watched via video feed, seeing my cousin take credit for terms I had dictated. Fascinating, I murmured, checking my phone again. The latest report showed Evergreen's real financial situation. Massive debt, falling stock, and a desperate need for tomorrow's deal. Morgan, Aunt Catherine called out, perhaps you should sit at the children's table. The adults need to discuss business. I touched the fountain pen in my pocket again, thinking about tomorrow's meeting. About how their faces would look when they realized who really controlled their fate. Of course, I replied mildly. I wouldn't want to interfere with important family business. As I moved away, I heard William's voice. Can't believe she still comes to these things. Probably hoping some of the family success will rub off. If they only knew that their family success was built on foundations I controlled. That every major contract, every significant deal, every financial lifeline they'd grabbed in the past year had been orchestrated by the person they called a mistake. My phone buzzed one final time. Confirmation that everything was ready for tomorrow. The contracts prepared, the press releases drafted, the truth about to be revealed. I watched my family celebrate their illusory success, knowing that in less than 24 hours, they would learn exactly what their mistake had become. The next morning, I arrived early at Morgan International's headquarters, watching the Barrett family members arrive one by one for what they thought was a simple contract signing. Through the security feeds, I observed their reactions to the building's grandeur, a stark contrast to Evergreen's increasingly shabby offices. "Ms. Morgan," my assistant Sarah appeared, "the Barretts are gathering in the main conference room. They still think they're meeting with Summit Acquisitions CEO." I smiled, adjusting my now impeccable designer suit. Gone was yesterday's deliberately understated outfit, replaced by the armor I wore as one of the most powerful CEOs in the business world. "William's doing his usual pre-meeting performance," Sarah added, showing me the security feed. My cousin was holding court, boasting about his negotiating skills to anyone who would listen. If he only knew that his brilliant negotiations had been carefully orchestrated by the cousin he called a mistake. That every concession he thought he'd won had been precisely calculated to ensure Evergreen's complete submission to my control. "Morgan." My mother's surprised voice made me turn. She stood in the reception area looking confused. "What are you doing here?" "I work here," I replied simply, watching her take in my transformed appearance. But this is Morgan International. They're one of the largest." Her voice trailed off as understanding began to dawn. "Yes, mother. One of the largest private corporations in the world. Would you like to know who owns it?" Before she could respond, William burst out of the conference room. "Where's the CEO? Don't they know who we are? The Barretts don't wait for anyone." I stepped forward, my Louboutins clicking on the marble floor. "Actually, William, they're waiting for me." The silence was absolute. My family stared as I walked toward the conference room, their perfect world beginning to crack. "This is ridiculous," Aunt Catherine sputtered. "Morgan's just a junior analyst at some small firm." "No," I corrected her, opening my briefcase to reveal the contracts. "I own Morgan International. Every subsidiary, every shell company including Summit Acquisitions, your supposed savior." William's face went pale. "Summit Acquisitions, but I negotiated." "You negotiated with my representatives," I finished for him. "While I watched you take credit for terms I had dictated. Did you really think you outsmarted one of the largest corporations in the world? Or did you just not bother to look closely at who really controlled the deal?" My Uncle Richard stood up, his face red. "This is impossible. You're the family mistake. The one who couldn't cut it in the real business world." I laid the contracts on the table, each page bearing Morgan International's letterhead. "Shall we discuss the real business world? Like how Evergreen has been secretly borrowing money to maintain appearances. Or how every major client you've landed in the past year was actually controlled by my companies." Sarah distributed copies of Evergreen's true financial statements, documents showing just how dependent they'd become on companies I controlled. "Every time you called me a mistake," I continued, "I was building something bigger than you could imagine. While you were mocking my career choices, I was buying the companies you depended on. While you were relegating me to the children's table at family events, I was positioning myself to take control of everything you valued." The room erupted in chaos. Board members frantically flipping through the contracts, realizing what they were about to sign. My cousins trying to process how the family failure had orchestrated their downfall. My mother staring at me like she'd never seen me before. "Let me explain exactly what these contracts mean," I said, my voice cutting through the chaos. "As of today, Evergreen Enterprises becomes a wholly owned subsidiary of Morgan International. All management decisions, all financial controls, all corporate policies will answer to me." William lunged for the contracts, but Sarah smoothly intercepted him. "Those numbers, they can't be right. We're not that far in debt." "Actually, you are," I replied, pulling up Evergreen's real financial statements on the conference room screens. "Every loan you've taken, every client you've landed, every deal you've made in the past year, all of it was controlled by my companies. I've owned your fate for longer than you realize." "But the Maxwell contract," Aunt Catherine protested weakly. "William negotiated that personally." I smiled, remembering how proud they'd been of that deal. "Maxwell Industries is a subsidiary of Morgan International. Just like Palmer Technologies, Green Solutions, and every other major client you think saved your company this year. I orchestrated every success you claimed as your own. My mother sank into a chair, her perfectly maintained facade cracking. All this time, while we were calling you a mistake. I finished for her. Yes. While you were dismissing me at family functions, I was building an empire. While you were mocking my career choices, I was positioning myself to take everything you valued. The fountain pen felt heavy in my hand as I prepared to sign the contracts. Would you like to know what happens next? Every executive position will be reviewed. Every corporate account audited. Every bit of mismanagement and nepotism exposed. You can't do this to your family. Uncle Richard exploded. Family. I laughed softly. Was it family when you called me a mistake at every reunion? When you excluded me from business discussions? When you treated me like a failure while failing yourselves? Sarah distributed another set of documents. Detailed reports of Evergreen's mismanagement under my family's leadership. William's failed ventures that he covered up with corporate funds. Aunt Catherine's unauthorized use of company resources. Uncle Richard's creative accounting to hide the real losses. Did you think no one would notice? The room had gone deathly quiet. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows I could see Morgan International's logo reflected on the buildings across the street. My real legacy, not the family name they thought meant everything. Morgan, my mother tried again, surely we can discuss this, as a family? We could have discussed many things as a family, Mother. Instead you chose to believe I was a mistake. Now I'm choosing to show you exactly what that mistake became. I began signing the contracts, each signature transferring another piece of Evergreen to my control. By the way, William, that office you're so proud of? I'll need it cleared by tomorrow. The new management team arrives next week. New management? He stammered. But I'm vice president. No, I corrected him. You were vice president. Now you're what you always called me, a mistake in the company's history. My phone buzzed with urgent messages from board members, finally realizing the full scope of what was happening. Their perfectly ordered world was crumbling, and the person they'd dismissed as a mistake held all the power. The press release goes out in an hour, I announced, watching their faces pale further. How does it feel knowing that tomorrow everyone will learn that your family mistake now owns your legacy? Aunt Catherine found her voice. The other family businesses, our partnerships, are all dependent on companies I control, I finished for her. Every major contract, every significant partnership, every financial relationship, all of it leads back to Morgan International. To me. I stood straightening my jacket. You have until the end of the week to clear out your offices. The security team will supervise to ensure no company property leaves the building. And yes, William, that includes your precious corporate car. But where will we go? My mother asked quietly. What will we do? Perhaps you can start over, I suggested. Build something real instead of living on appearances. Though I recommend not calling anyone a mistake along the way. They might end up owning everything you have. Sarah began collecting the signed contracts as my family sat in stunned silence. The empire they'd thought was their birthright now belonged to the person they'd spent years dismissing. One last thing, I added, turning back at the door. The annual family reunion next month? It will be held here in my building. Feel free to attend, as guests, not hosts. And this time I'll decide who sits at the children's table. As I walked out, I heard the chaos erupting behind me. William trying to call his lawyer, only to learn that his legal firm was also owned by Morgan International. Aunt Catherine attempting to access company accounts that were already frozen. Uncle Richard finally reading the fine print of contracts he should have reviewed months ago. My phone buzzed one final time. The press release was ready. Morgan International acquires Evergreen Enterprises. Family mistake becomes family owner. Sarah, I called out as we entered my private elevator. Make sure every business publication has the story. I want everyone to know exactly who owns the Barrett family legacy now. And their personal effects from the offices? I touched the fountain pen that had signed their fate. Pack them in boxes marked family mistakes. They can collect them from the lobby. The elevator rose to my penthouse office, where floor-to-ceiling windows offered a view of the city I'd quietly conquered while my family was busy mocking my existence. Sometimes success isn't about proving people wrong. It's about becoming so right that they can't ignore you anymore. And sometimes, the biggest mistake a family can make is calling their strongest member a mistake. Tomorrow, the business world would learn that the Barrett family's mistake had become their owner. That the person they dismissed now controlled their fate. That success isn't about what people call you. It's about what you build while they're busy calling you names. The mistake had become the master. And the family that created her would spend the rest of their lives working for the person they tried to diminish. The next morning, as my family members were escorted from their offices, I watched from my penthouse suite. Each box of their belongings told a story. Trophies from victories they'd stolen from others. Awards for successes they hadn't earned, photos of celebrations where they'd pushed me aside. "Your parents are in the lobby," Sarah reported. "Your mother's crying. Tell security to give them visitor badges," I replied. "From now on, they'll need permission to enter the building they once thought they owned." A final message flashed on my screen: the stock market's response to the takeover. Evergreen's shares had plummeted while Morgan International's soared. The business world was already calling it the revenge story of the year.